Matt Thou Art That posted a video a few days ago excuse me, called Metanoia, which I think was posted in response to one of Piro's videos. And what little I can remember of it, and I should remember more of it really, is it was to do with the idea of going beyond the mind or something like that, something to do with God. I'll have to look at it again. One of the reasons why I can't remember it is that that term, metanoia, is one that I'm kind of familiar with in a different way really. With this article, this journal article I read about 16 or 17 years ago in a journal called Play and Culture. I think I've got it at home somewhere, I'll see if I can find it. But it was called At Play in the Fields of the Lord, and then the subtitle was something like Metanoia in the Creation of Consciousness, something like that. It had the word consciousness in it, and metanoia. And I think it was a slightly different meaning of the word metanoia to the way that Matt was using it, but quite an interesting relationship between it. In this one, metanoia was about a state of, a kind of mental state, cognitive state, associated with play. Not play in the kind of crudely behavioural sense, but play in a psychological sense. What it's like to be at play, what it's like when your mind is in play. And the idea of it was that that kind of playfulness of mind, but perhaps other kinds of playfulness, emerges at certain God, it's really slippy here. It emerges at certain times when selective pressure is removed. So the evolutionary pressure, for example, to naturally select a certain cognitive process or naturally select a certain mimetic line might be eased off at times when there's less stress in the environment, and that allows for a more fuzzy sets of relationships between ideas, or a more leaky system in the set of cognition, less rigorous pruning of the dendrites or whatever they are, in favour of, as I say, a more florid and open-ended and playful set of relationships. And here play is being used in the polysemic way. It doesn't just mean play in terms of, like what kids do, playful as opposed to real, but play in the way that like a joint has play in it. There's a bit of movement in it, a bit of space for movement. And that idea of space for movement, or space for growth, or space for expression, space for creativity is quite important in that idea, in this idea of metanoia, at play in the fields of the Lord. And so the idea is that metanoia, the space for play, exists as a mental state associated with removing the selective pressures that require you to think in really pragmatic, practical ways all the time, so you can be a bit more florid in your conceptualization, but also by inference other kinds of playfulness when the pressure is removed from the organism in terms of its ability to survive, so it has more free time, it has more access to resources, it's not under such reproductive stress. None of those kind of things are in place. Then again, playful behaviour ensues, which is more multivalent, lots of variation in it, lots of creativity again happens in it. So I'm talking. Oh yes, okay. So what's I should say I'm kind of remembering this article from years ago, but I'll see if I can find it. But one of the things I thought was quite interesting was about this reference in Matt's video, picking up on what I assume is Piro's reference to God and metanoia. Because even though the article that I'm talking about is called At Play in the Fields of the Lord, and even though from what I remember it does cite things like yoga and Sufi spinning or something like that, it's some kind of spiritual practices, in inverted commas. Even though it does talk about it, it doesn't mention the word God and doesn't talk about spirituality to any extent. But I think there is a way of bringing it back in again, really, or a way of interpreting it in that way. Because this idea of a playfulness, of the removal of a selective pressure so that a space opens up, reminds me, or just has a kind of resonance for me at least, of some kind of apophatic understandings of God and spirituality. This idea of God or the spiritual or the absolute, the one, the source, all those kind of things, as being a nothingness or a void, an emptiness, a kind of pregnant vacuum in which things can happen. I mean, I quite like the idea of that, and that seems to me to be related in some way to this opening up of a space. You know, what was a single track, forced into that track by the stress and pressures of the environment and all those other kinds of selective pressures I've mentioned. The transformation of that single track to a more expansive, open space in which lots and lots of different journeys can be made, or lots of different explorations can be had, lots of creativity can take place, lots of different kinds of thought processes can emerge. It isn't an anthropomorphic idea of God, clearly. It is an idea of God as a space in which the world might appear, or the world in which the world of alternatives might appear. But it is a creative space. It isn't an empty space in which something else happens. It is the empty space which causes the possibility of things to happen. Without the empty space, there can be no florid growth of dendrites, no branching of conceptual ideas, no playfulness, no metanoia.